much appreciate this opportunity. Can you all hear me? So I met Amy and James last March or February when James was running for select board. And I immediately supported him. I didn't know him, but I got to know him through the campaign, and we talked, and really felt like he spoke for me. And it got my sympathy dog. It got my political juices running again, and when I decided to run for state representative for the towns of Whitefield, Carroll, and Jefferson, one of the first things I did was come over to their house and tell them I was running, and they were unhesitantly supportive, and that was just so wonderful. And they told me about this extravaganza and said they will have me come and speak or whatever, and so here we are, and it's my first campaign speech, so please bear with me. One of the things that I'm really interested in about candidates is what motivates them to run for political office, or what seeds were planted in them that got them this far. And I've thought about that, and I've listened to a lot of campaign speeches, and I decided I'm going to talk about where my activism comes from. And I have to give all the credit to my parents. They were museum professionals. My father was the director of the Dayton Art Institute in Dayton, Ohio.
Woo! Represent. Sorry.
My mother was a curator at the same museum. She taught art history, and she was very active in the community, working on urban development or urban renewal, and they inspired in us a commitment to service, service to the community. And my father was devoted, as it turns out, I learned recently, to educating, exposing, enlightening the community about art and the essentialness of art in democracy, in democratic society. And that rubbed off on me as well. They were liberal intellects who drummed into their children the value of education. They studied all the different cultures around the world, starting with the prehistoric and all the way up to the modern, and they exposed me to that, and I pretty much grew up in the Dayton Art Institute, which was a really amazing playground to grow up in. But a story resonates with me that I've never forgotten, and I'll never forget in my lifetime until I get Alzheimer's. But on their anniversary was April 4th. They got married April 4th, 1950. And we would have a dinner for them at the house, and I'll never forget April 4th, 1968. We were sitting down for dinner, we sat down for dinner, and the phone rang. And of course my mother had to get up and go to the rotary phone that was attached to the wall to pick up the phone and answer it and find out who was on the other end. Maybe that's foreign to some people here. But I heard silence, and my mother came in to the dining room in tears, crying, couldn't control her emotions. And she told my father that Martin Luther King had been murdered. And I was 9 years old at the time, and I was so distraught for my parents. They were so upset, and I didn't understand. I didn't know who Martin Luther King was. And I remember going to school the next day, and there were, everybody was talking about it. And I said to my friends, oh, my mother and father knew Martin. So why else would they be crying so hard if they didn't know Martin? Well, of course, I found out later that Martin was, the leader of movement that his death also created a movement. And it created an awareness in me, and I think it planted a seed in me of awareness and racial division and a world that needed to be healed from a long time past. And that was the seed, I think, that was planted in me to be an activist and to work to promote civil rights and to promote anti-discrimination. I ended up somehow becoming a lawyer, despite going to college to study art history. And when I moved to New Hampshire in 1989, I got involved in the civil rights movement to add the LGBTQ community to the anti-discrimination law and to finally end discrimination in employment, public accommodations, and housing. And that's got me involved politically in the state, and I moved on from there to represent victims of domestic violence and lobby and pass better laws to protect survivors and to address the issues. But I never really had time to consider political office, and I don't think it was really in my wheelhouse at the time either. So when, back in May, I was invited to run for this seat that had become vacated by Edith Tucker, who is our current state representative, and she's running for state senate. She invited me to take the seat, or to run for the seat, and I said yes. And it's been a really amazing experience for me to go around and knock on doors and talk to people and find out what their concerns are and introduce myself. So I'm excited to be running for this office. I'm sure I've forgotten some of the things I was going to say. I've marched in Washington for women's rights, for the passage of the ERA, and for the preservation of the women's right to choose. So obviously this horrible decision about Roe v. Wade has propelled me to make sure that women are not stripped of that right. Thank you. Yep. My opponent, if he's elected, will ban abortion from the moment of conception. So there is a clear distinction between the two of us. My other main issue is public education. Like I said, my parents drummed into me the importance of education, and it settled into my whole being. And when the last legislators, the Republican legislative body, passed a bill that prohibited, they call it the Divisive Concepts Bill, that censored teaching of history, the true history of slavery and racism in our country, I decided I needed to get more involved, and I started following the school board meetings and just getting aware of what's going on here. We need to teach proper history. We need to learn from our history. And my opponent, if he were elected, doesn't believe in government involvement in education. I think he would take us back to pre-revolutionary period. He would introduce religion into government. There would be no separation of church and state. He's only one of 400 legislators, but we can't let it start with him. And so there is a clear choice for whoever's here who can vote for me. And I hope you will consider, well, yeah, I know you will. I'm preaching to the choir here. This is really just an opportunity for me to give my first campaign speech. So I really appreciate your patience, and I hope it did okay. And I will no longer interrupt the regularly scheduled program. Thank you very much.